Chapter 1. The Cost of Betrayal. The end of Sam and Vanessa's marriage wasn't the result of a single dramatic moment. It was a gradual, creeping shift, a subtle drift that snuck up on Sam almost imperceptibly. There was no single epiphany where Sam suddenly realized he no longer loved Vanessa. Instead, their relationship unraveled in the quiet, unspoken spaces between them, the spaces that once felt comforting, but had slowly turned hollow. In the early days of their marriage, their life together had been filled with warmth and shared joy. Mornings started with laughter at the breakfast table, and evenings were spent in easy companionship. But over time, these moments of connection began to fade. One minute they were enjoying each other's company, and the next, they were sitting in silence, staring at their plates, wondering why the laughter had stopped. The routine that once bound them together now felt like a chain. Sam was a man driven by the pursuit of excitement and novelty. The thrill of new experiences, the rush of adrenaline from unexpected moments, were what fueled him. He thrived on change and unpredictability, always seeking the next big thing to reinvigorate his life. In contrast, Vanessa was a rock of stability. She cherished the comfort of routine, the predictability of their life together. The security of their relationship, with its familiar rhythms and reliable patterns, was a source of comfort and reassurance for her. She found beauty in their shared experiences, in the quiet certainty that they were building a life together. For Sam, however, the very stability that Vanessa valued began to feel like a cage. He didn't recognize the shift in his feelings right away. The love he had for Vanessa hadn't vanished. Rather, it was overshadowed by a growing sense of confinement. The comfort of their life together, which had once been a refuge, now seemed stifling. There was no longer the spark that had once made him feel alive. The routine that Vanessa embraced now felt monotonous and restrictive to him. Initially, Sam attributed his growing dissatisfaction to work, stress, and the pressures of daily life. He convinced himself that these feelings were a normal part of the married life cycle, that every long-term relationship must inevitably face such phases of discontent. He began to spend more time away from home, using work as an excuse. He would stay out late, claiming he needed to clear his head with colleagues or deal with urgent business matters. To him, it seemed normal to seek some space after 5 years of marriage. He told himself that everyone needed a break from the day-to-day monotony, a respite from the routine. Vanessa, deeply trusting and committed, noticed these changes, but chose to believe they were just temporary. She had always trusted Sam, and their relationship had weathered many storms before. They had navigated financial stresses, career ups and downs, and the general challenges of early marriage. Their love had endured these trials. So why should this phase be any different? She saw Sam's late nights and distant demeanor as mere signs of temporary fatigue or work-related stress. When Sam came home late with a distant look in his eyes, Vanessa didn't push him. She didn't press for answers or question his whereabouts. She accepted his explanations at face value, believing that the strain he was under was merely a phase. Their history of shared experiences and mutual trust led her to accept his reassurances without doubt. She had no reason to suspect anything more serious. They had always shared everything: dreams, fears, victories, and setbacks. What Vanessa didn't realize was that Sam's mind had already begun to wander before he even fully understood it himself. There wasn't a particular moment when he consciously decided he wanted out of the relationship. It was more a gradual erosion of connection. Every time he looked at Vanessa, the woman who had once been the center of his world, all he could feel was the weight of obligation. The life they had built together began to feel more like a routine than an adventure. Sam didn't want to hurt Vanessa. He wasn't a bad person, nor did he set out to destroy what they had built together. But the pull of something new and exciting started to gnaw at him. He began to wonder about the possibilities beyond the confines of his marriage, about what he might be missing. These thoughts, once fleeting, grew more frequent and persistent. They created a restlessness that Sam struggled to ignore. It was against this backdrop of dissatisfaction and yearning that Bella entered Sam's life. The timing was pivotal. Bella, with her vibrant energy and allure, provided an escape from the drudgery Sam felt trapped in. She represented everything Sam craved: newness, excitement, and a break from the routine. Her presence in his life was not a calculated betrayal, but rather a manifestation of his own unfulfilled desires. Sam didn't set out to cheat on Vanessa. He didn't wake up one day and decide to betray her. But as the distance between them grew and the lure of novelty became stronger, it became easier for him to justify his actions. He believed Vanessa wouldn't understand his need for excitement or why he felt trapped. In his mind, he was merely seeking something that was missing from his life, something that Vanessa, bound by her love for stability, couldn't provide. And so when Bella walked into his life, it was like a spark to dry tinder. The thrill of the affair was intoxicating, a temporary balm for the emptiness Sam felt. It wasn't an intentional act of malice, but a desperate grasp at something he felt was missing, something that seemed to offer a fleeting escape from the monotony of his life. With Vanessa. Chapter 2. Bella swept into Sam's life like a storm he never saw coming. With her spontaneous, carefree spirit, she was everything Vanessa wasn't. Where Vanessa was organized, measured, and predictable, Bella was untamed, living on her own terms and disregarding societal norms. Bella's presence commanded attention. She moved with an effortless grace that made her seem like she was always in motion, always alive. Her long legs, piercing blue eyes, and a smile that could warm even the coldest heart gave her an air of glamour. She wasn't a full-time model, but her sporadic gigs and her radiant demeanor gave her a model-like allure, drifting through life with a sense of freedom that was both intoxicating and elusive. Sam first encountered Bella at a corporate networking event he had reluctantly attended. It was the kind of dull affair he usually avoided, filled with formalities and small talk that left him drained. Bella, however, wasn't supposed to be there. She had accompanied a friend, a photographer hired to capture the event. Sam, nursing a drink and attempting to blend into the background, was suddenly jolted from his disinterest by a laugh, a loud, infectious sound that cut through the stifling atmosphere of the event. He looked up to find Bella standing by the bar, her laughter drawing the attention of those around her. She was in stark contrast to the other attendees who wore their suits and practiced their carefully curated expressions. Bella, with her relaxed and confident demeanor, seemed to float through the crowd, captivating those who crossed her path. Sam watched her, entranced by the effortless way she moved and the vibrant energy she brought with her. Bella's eyes eventually met his from across the room. Rather than looking away, she held his gaze and offered a slow, knowing smile, a gesture that sent a jolt through Sam, stirring something he hadn't felt in a long time. Before he could fully process the encounter, Bella was walking toward him, that smile still on her face. "Are you always this serious?" she asked, leaning against the bar beside him. "You look like you're at a funeral, not a party." Sam chuckled, his mood lightening despite himself. "Not a fan of these kinds of events." "Yeah, me neither," Bella replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I wasn't even invited. Just came along to keep a friend company. But hey, free drinks, right?" Their conversation flowed effortlessly. Bella's boldness and unfiltered personality drew Sam in. She had a knack for making even the most mundane topics seem fascinating, and it was her ability to bring laughter and lightness into their exchange that captivated him. Despite his attempts to convince himself that it was harmless, the flirtation between them was electric. Sam found himself laughing more in that 1 hour than he had in months. Bella's presence was a breath of fresh air, an escape from the predictability of his life with Vanessa. What began as innocent flirting, a joke here, a compliment there, slowly evolved into something more. Sam told himself it was just a bit of fun, an escape from the monotony. He was still married, and he assured himself that he wasn't planning on anything beyond friendly banter. But as weeks passed, their interactions became more frequent. They kept running into each other at industry events, social gatherings, and eventually, their text exchanges under the guise of networking grew more personal. The more they communicated, the more Sam found himself eagerly anticipating their interactions. With Bella, Sam didn't have to deal with the pressures of work or the responsibilities he carried at home. Their time together was just laughter and lightness. He began to think about her at odd times, daydreaming about their next encounter. Unbeknownst to him, a part of him was slowly detaching from the life he had built with Vanessa, drawn towards the thrill Bella provided. Then came the night everything changed. At another work event, a fancier, more extravagant affair where the drinks flowed freely and conversations were shallow, Sam was surprised to see Bella. She was wearing a sleek black dress that drew every eye in the room. The evening unfolded in a haze of drinks and laughter. Bella and Sam spent most of the night talking, their conversation flowing easily, their connection deepening with each passing hour. As the night wore on, Sam found himself tipsy, the alcohol amplifying the heady excitement Bella's presence brought. She offered to share a cab home since they lived in the same direction. Sam, caught up in the moment and not thinking clearly, agreed. The cab ride was filled with more laughter, more playful teasing. Bella's hand brushed against his arm, sending a spark through him, an electric jolt that ignited a long-buried desire. They arrived at Bella's apartment first. As the cab idled at the curb, Bella leaned in close, her breath warm against his cheek. "You want to come up for a drink?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. Sam hesitated, acutely aware of the crossroads he faced. He thought of Vanessa, their life together, and the trust she had placed in him. He knew that going up to Bella's apartment would cross a line he could never come back from. But Bella's smile, a slow, seductive curl of her lips, blurred his rational thoughts. In that moment, Sam convinced himself that it was just one night, that it didn't mean anything. He told himself he would deal with the guilt later. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Why not?" What started as a casual invitation turned into a night of blurred lines. One drink turned into two, and then Bella was leaning in, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something he couldn't even recall. The tension between them ignited, and before Sam knew it, they were kissing. The weight of his marriage, the consequences of his actions, all of it faded away in the thrill of the moment. That night, Sam crossed a line he had never intended to. When he woke the next morning in Bella's bed, his head pounded with a combination of alcohol and guilt. Bella lay beside him, her hair spread out on the pillow, looking as beautiful as ever. For a fleeting moment, Sam considered leaving quietly, pretending that the night had never happened. But the gravity of his betrayal settled heavily on him. There was no going back. He dressed silently, careful not to wake her, and left the apartment in a daze. As he stepped out into the morning light, the reality of his actions hit him with brutal clarity. He had betrayed Vanessa. Everything he had built with her, the trust, the love, had been tainted. It didn't matter that he hadn't planned it, that he told himself it was just one night, that it didn't mean anything. Because, of course, it did. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. Vanessa knew something was wrong long before Sam ever said a word. It wasn't anything obvious at first, no grand revelation, no fight, no confession. It was in the small things, the details she had trained herself to overlook in the name of love. It was in the way he touched her, or more accurately, the way he didn't. Where there used to be warmth and affection, there was now distance, his hand barely brushing hers in passing. The playful embraces and spontaneous kisses were replaced by stiff, mechanical gestures, as if he was going through the motions, but his heart wasn't in it. There was something else, too, something that ate away at her slowly. Sam had started avoiding her eyes. Whenever she tried to hold his gaze, he'd look away quickly, like he was afraid of what she might see if she looked too closely. He was different, guarded in a way that made Vanessa feel like she didn't know him anymore. The phone was the biggest clue. It was always in his hand, a constant presence. She had never been the kind of wife to snoop or pry, but lately it felt like he was hiding something. He kept his phone face down on the table whenever they sat down to eat or watch TV. The messages that used to come in openly now came with the phone's screen darkened, as if he was deliberately trying to shield her from something. Vanessa told herself it was nothing. She had convinced herself for weeks that they were just going through a rough patch, the kind all couples went through. Marriage had its ups and downs, didn't it? She told herself that Sam was just stressed from work, that he needed some space. It was easier to believe that than to confront the nagging suspicion growing in the back of her mind. But deep down, she knew. She just didn't want to face it yet. Then came the text message. One careless moment was all it took. One slip-up from Sam that shattered the fragile peace Vanessa had built for herself. She wasn't looking for it, hadn't been snooping through his phone. It was just there, on the screen, left open by accident when he left the room. The message was from someone named Bella. "Miss you," it read, followed by a heart emoji. The words were simple, but they hit Vanessa like a freight train. Her stomach dropped, her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands went cold. She stared at the screen, hoping, praying, that she had misunderstood, that it was some sort of inside joke, a text to a colleague or a friend. But she knew better. She felt the truth in her bones. She sat there for a moment, frozen in place, the phone still in her hand. In that instant, everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her husband, was ripped apart. It was like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared, leaving her in free fall. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Vanessa had always trusted Sam, even when things got hard, when the Yor had their fights, when he seemed distant. She had believed in him, in their bond. She never thought he would betray her like this. But now, the proof was staring her in the face, undeniable and cruel. When Sam came home that evening, Vanessa didn't even wait for him to settle in. She couldn't. The words tumbled out of her before she could stop them, her voice shaking with the weight of her emotions. "I saw the message," she said quietly, holding up his phone. From Bella. Sam froze. For a split second, she saw the panic flash across his face, the guilt that he'd been trying to hide for so long. He didn't even try to deny it. What was the point? The truth was already out there, hanging between them like a knife. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "Vanessa, I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses, no lies, just an apology that felt empty in the face of everything he had done. Vanessa's heart shattered into a million pieces. She had expected him to lie, to tell her that she had misunderstood, that it was all some big mistake. But his apology only confirmed what she already knew. He had cheated. He had betrayed her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just... I don't even know how it got this far. It didn't mean anything." Vanessa blinked, trying to make sense of his words. It didn't mean anything? How could he say that? How could he look her in the eye and tell her that his betrayal, the destruction of their marriage, didn't mean anything? "But it did," she said, her voice breaking. "It meant everything." Sam opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. What could he say that would make this right? What excuse could he give that would undo the hurt he had caused? There was nothing. He knew that, and so did Vanessa. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She just stood there, numb, as the realization set in. Her marriage was over. The life they had built together, the 5 years they had shared, was gone. It was like someone had taken a match to everything she had known, leaving her to sift through the ashes. The divorce was swift. Vanessa wasn't the kind of woman to let things drag out once her mind was made up. She wasn't going to fight for a man who didn't want to fight for her. She had more self-respect than that. She packed her things, leaving Sam to sort out his own mess, and filed the papers within the week. There was no long, drawn-out legal battle, no arguments over assets or who would keep the house. It was just a clean break, cold and efficient, like a business transaction. Vanessa felt strangely detached through the whole process. She thought she would feel more, that the end of her marriage would crush her. But by the time they signed the papers, she was almost numb. It was as though her heart had been frozen ever since the moment she saw that text message. 5 years of marriage dissolved in a sterile courtroom, with just a few signatures and a final handshake between lawyers. It was over as quickly as it had begun. As Vanessa walked out of the courthouse that day, she felt the weight of finality settle over her. She wasn't Mrs. Sam Walker anymore. She wasn't a wife, a partner. She was just Vanessa again, alone. But as she stepped out into the bright sunlight, a strange feeling stirred in her chest. It wasn't sadness, or regret, or anger. It was freedom. Chapter 4. Alone. Bella was ecstatic when the divorce was finalized. The end of Sam's marriage had been a long-awaited victory for her, a signal that she could finally have him all to herself, without the shadow of guilt or secrecy. She imagined that this was the beginning of something great, a new chapter where she and Sam could live openly as a couple. For a brief time, it seemed like their dream was within reach. Their weekends were spent in Bella's chic apartment, a place that contrasted sharply with the life Sam had shared with Vanessa. The apartment was stylish, adorned with designer furniture and vibrant artwork, reflecting Bella's flair for living in the moment. They would go out to trendy parties, dine at upscale restaurants, and revel in the thrill of their new relationship. Sam was drawn to the immediate excitement and passion that Bella exuded the kind of fervor that had initially pulled him away from Vanessa. Yet as the initial high of their new romance wore off, reality began to set in. Sam soon realized that the qualities that had attracted him to Bella, her vivacity and unpredictability, weren't enough to sustain a meaningful, long-term relationship. The spark that had once seemed so intoxicating now felt hollow. The vibrant, carefree lifestyle Bella enjoyed was exhilarating but lacked the depth and commitment Sam had once shared with Vanessa. Bella, meanwhile, remained focused on living in the present. She thrived on spontaneity and wasn't interested in building a future or making plans. To her, the affair had been an exhilarating diversion, but the excitement had faded, leaving her disinterested in any form of permanence. As the novelty of their relationship wore off, Bella began to drift away, her attention turning back to her own needs and desires. Sam attempted to salvage their relationship. He tried to plan trips, make long-term commitments, and show Bella that he was serious about their future together. He hoped to rekindle the passion they once had, believing that if he could just make things work, they might build something lasting. But Bella's disinterest became increasingly apparent. She wasn't willing to invest in their future, and her casual attitude made it clear she had no intention of sticking around for the long haul. One day, without any dramatic confrontation or heartfelt conversation, Bella left Sam. It was a departure marked by its sheer abruptness. There was no goodbye, no explanation, just an empty apartment and a message that read, "I need to move on." For Sam, the silence was deafening. The realization of what he had lost crashed over him with a heavy, suffocating force. He had sacrificed everything for a fleeting affair, his wife, his home, his stability, only to end up alone. The woman who had seemed like an answer to his dissatisfaction was now a distant memory, leaving him with nothing but regret and the bitter taste of betrayal. As he stood amidst the remnants of his once thriving life, Sam was left to grapple with the profound emptiness of his choices. He had pursued a transient thrill at the cost of his everything, and now he was left with the stark reality of what that truly meant. Chapter 5. The attempt to reconcile. Alone in his apartment, Sam found himself enveloped in a heavy silence. The walls, once filled with the echoes of shared laughter and conversations, now seemed to close in on him, amplifying the weight of his regret. His thoughts were relentless, replaying every moment of his past with Vanessa. He saw her face as she discovered the betrayal, the disbelief, and heartbreak etched into her features. He could still hear the tremor in her voice when she asked him why he had done it, a question he had been unable to answer then and still could not answer now. The reality of his actions had settled heavily upon him. Bella had left without a trace, and with her departure, Sam was left to face the fallout of his choices alone. He knew he had to make things right, or at least try to. The idea of reaching out to Vanessa consumed him. He needed her forgiveness, or at the very least, a chance to explain himself. He picked up his phone a dozen times, each time setting it back down as his anxiety took hold. The decision to call her felt monumental. His hands shook as he dialed her number, each ring a painful reminder of the distance that had grown between them. When Vanessa's voice finally came through the receiver, it was cold, carrying an unmistakable chill that cut through the brief warmth of their past conversations. "Hello?" Vanessa's voice was distant, almost clinical. It was as if she were speaking to a stranger rather than her former husband. "I just want to talk," Sam said, his voice betraying his nerves. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. I know I screwed up. But I miss you, Vanessa. I miss us." There was a long, drawn-out pause on the other end. The silence was suffocating, each second stretching into an eternity. When Vanessa finally spoke, her words were sharp, cutting through the air with a clarity that was both painful and final. "Sam, you made your choice," she said, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "There's nothing left to talk about." Desperation edged into Sam's voice as he tried to argue. "Please, Vanessa. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm willing to change. I want to fix this, to make things right between us." Her response was unyielding. "I don't think you understand how much you hurt me," Vanessa said, her voice cracking under the strain of her emotions. "I can't just forget what you did. It's over." The finality of her words was like a punch to the gut. The phone call ended abruptly, and Sam was left alone with his regrets, his pleas echoing unanswered in his empty apartment. The silence that followed was a stark reminder of the chasm between them, a chasm that no amount of remorse or explanation could bridge. The relationship he had once taken for granted was irrevocably lost, and with it, a part of himself that he could never regain. Chapter 6. Vanessa's Revenge. Vanessa had always been a woman of action. She thrived on control and momentum, refusing to let life happen to her without a fight. The end of her marriage to Sam had left her reeling, but she channeled her hurt into productivity. She buried herself in work, immersed herself in new hobbies, and threw herself into social activities, all to distract from the gnawing pain of betrayal. But beneath the surface, the anger simmered, raw and potent. The betrayal Sam had inflicted was not something Vanessa could easily brush aside. His infidelity had shattered her sense of security, demolishing the trust she had once placed in him so completely. She felt a burning need for retribution, to make him understand the depth of her suffering and the weight of his actions. To her, the idea of revenge was not merely about striking back. It was about justice, about balancing the scales in a way that would resonate deeply with him. And so, she devised a plan, carefully and methodically. Vanessa's professional life had afforded her a network of connections within Sam's industry. She knew exactly where to strike to cause the most damage. Sam's career was his pride and joy. It was what he valued above all else, the cornerstone of his identity and sense of worth. If she could undermine that, she could make him feel the repercussions of his betrayal. Vanessa began by leveraging her network. She approached key figures within Sam's industry, people who had been influential in his career and whom she had interacted with in the past. She planted seeds of doubt, subtly suggesting that Sam was unreliable, untrustworthy, and perhaps even unethical in his business dealings. Her approach was both calculated and discreet, ensuring that no single source could be traced back to her. The rumors started small, whispers of doubt and discontent. But in the close-knit circles of the business world, even the smallest spark can ignite a fire. Clients who had previously been enthusiastic about working with Sam began to reconsider. Contracts were delayed, meetings were canceled, and deals that once seemed secure started to falter. The once flourishing career that Sam had taken for granted began to crumble under the weight of Vanessa's meticulously crafted sabotage. As the months passed, the impact of Vanessa's actions became undeniable. Sam's professional reputation took a nosedive. Projects that had once been his bread and butter were reassigned to other consultants. The flow of new business opportunities dried up, and Sam found himself increasingly isolated from the professional network he had once relied on. His phone calls went unanswered, emails were ignored, and clients who had previously sung his praises now spoke of him with thinly veiled disdain. The culmination of Vanessa's revenge was Sam's job loss. The company he worked for, now wary of the damage to their reputation and the controversies swirling around him, decided to let him go. Sam was left without the career that had been his anchor, the one thing he had valued above all else. When Vanessa heard the news, a surge of satisfaction coursed through her. The sense of vindication was intense, a brief but powerful rush of triumph. She had achieved her goal. She had made Sam feel a fraction of the pain he had caused her. The scales of justice had, for a moment, seemed to balance. Yet despite this fleeting satisfaction, the victory was hollow. As the initial elation faded, Vanessa was left with a profound sense of emptiness. The revenge had not healed her wounds or eased her heartache. Instead, it had left her feeling more isolated and desolate than before. The anger that had driven her to take such drastic measures had been an escape, a way to channel her hurt into something tangible. But now, with the revenge completed, she found herself facing the raw, unfiltered pain that had initially motivated her actions. The sense of closure she had hoped for did not materialize. Instead, Vanessa was left with the realization that revenge, while satisfying in the short term, did little to mend the deeper wounds within her. As she confronted the lingering pain, she began to understand that healing would require more than just retribution. It would require a journey toward forgiveness, self-discovery, and ultimately, a new beginning. Chapter 7. The Hollow Victory. Initially, the wave of vindication that washed over Vanessa was exhilarating. For a brief, fleeting moment, she felt a sense of justice. Sam had wronged her in the most profound way, and she had struck back, hitting him where it would hurt the most, his career. The sense of equilibrium felt almost tangible. It was as if, in her mind, the scales of fairness had finally been balanced. But as days turned into weeks, the sharp edges of that satisfaction began to erode. The fleeting triumph she had experienced started to lose its luster, revealing a deeper, more unsettling truth. The satisfaction of revenge was superficial, and it was quickly overshadowed by a profound emptiness that settled in her chest. Vanessa found herself increasingly isolated in her small apartment. The once comforting surroundings now felt stark and alien. The walls seemed to close in on her, amplifying the loneliness she had tried so hard to ignore. Her apartment, once a symbol of new beginnings, now felt like a cage, a reminder of the solitude that came with her decision to exact revenge. One evening, the silence of her apartment was broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Vanessa sat alone at her dining table, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. In front of her was a bottle of wine, half empty, its contents shimmering in the low light. She poured herself another glass, the clink of the bottle against the glass, punctuating the stillness of the night. As she stared at the swirling liquid, her thoughts began to unravel. The anger and pain that had fueled her quest for revenge now seemed like a heavy burden she could no longer bear. She realized that while she had sought to punish Sam for his betrayal, she had also inadvertently punished herself. The bitterness she had harbored had consumed her, leaving little room for anything but a hollow sense of victory. Vanessa reflected on her actions, recognizing that revenge had not mended the deep wounds inflicted by Sam. The betrayal was still a raw, open scar within her, and no amount of retribution could heal it. The act of revenge had not undone the pain or restored the trust that had been shattered. Instead, it had deepened her own sense of isolation and despair. The realization struck her with a jolt, like a cold wave crashing over her. She didn't want to be the kind of person who clung to anger and resentment. She didn't want her life to be defined by the revenge she had sought or the pain she had endured. The realization was both freeing and frightening. It was an acknowledgement that she needed to let go of the anger that had once driven her, that she needed to find a way to move forward without being weighed down by her past. Sitting there in the quiet of her apartment, Vanessa made a decision. She would no longer let her life be dictated by the need for revenge or the shadows of past betrayals. It was time to embrace a new path, one that allowed her to heal and find peace. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it was a journey she was determined to undertake. She needed to reclaim her own sense of self, to build a future where the pain of the past no longer dictated her actions or emotions. With a deep breath, Vanessa resolved to let go of the anger and bitterness that had consumed her. It was time to move forward, to rebuild her life on her own terms, and to find a sense of fulfillment that wasn't tied to the pain of the past. The road to healing would be long, but it was a path she was now ready to walk. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. Vanessa's decision to start anew was both liberating and daunting. The weight of her past, the pain, the betrayal, the revenge, had become too much to bear. She needed a fresh start, a blank slate far removed from the shadows of her former life. With resolve and a hint of trepidation, she began to pack up her belongings. Each item she packed was a symbol of her old life, a life that had been overshadowed by hurt and regret. She decided not to tell anyone where she was going, not her friends, not her family, not even her closest confidants. It wasn't out of malice or a desire to sever ties, but rather a need for solitude, a way to carve out a new identity without the baggage of her past. The thought of leaving behind familiar places and faces was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. She wanted to start anew, to rediscover herself without the constraints of her previous life weighing her down. As she settled into her new city, Vanessa was struck by the contrast between her old life and this fresh start. The city was vibrant and bustling, a place filled with new possibilities. She found an apartment in a lively neighborhood that was both affordable and charming. It was small but bright, with large windows that let in the morning sun and a quaint little balcony where she could sit with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by. Vanessa threw herself into her new job with enthusiasm. It was a role she had always dreamed of, one that aligned perfectly with her skills and passions. The work was fulfilling, and the positive energy of her new colleagues provided a refreshing change from the negativity that had characterized her past year. She embraced her responsibilities with a sense of purpose, finding satisfaction in the accomplishments and challenges that came with her new position. Socially, Vanessa began to build a new circle of friends. She attended local events, joined social groups, and engaged in community activities. The friendships she formed were genuine and free from the complexities of her past. It felt liberating to connect with people who knew nothing of her previous struggles, who saw her for who she was now rather than who she had been. As time passed, the sharp edges of Sam's betrayal began to soften. The pain that had once seemed overwhelming became a distant memory, a lesson learned rather than a wound constantly reopened. Vanessa found herself smiling more often, laughing with friends, and genuinely enjoying life. The process was gradual, but it was unmistakably real. Her new experiences and relationships provided a healing balm for the wounds of her past. Vanessa no longer dwelled on thoughts of Sam. She hoped that he had managed to find his own path and peace, but it no longer consumed her thoughts. The anger and hurt she had carried for so long had finally dissipated, replaced by a sense of calm and self-acceptance. She no longer needed to hold on to the past as a way to define herself. The past had been a chapter, but it was no longer the entirety of her story. With each passing day, Vanessa felt a growing sense of freedom. The chains of her old life had been cast off, and she was moving forward unburdened. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she faced it with hope rather than fear. She was free to create a new narrative, one that was uniquely her own, a narrative built on resilience, growth, and the promise of new beginnings. As she looked out from her apartment balcony one evening, the city lights twinkling below, Vanessa felt a profound sense of contentment. She had embraced change and had emerged stronger. The journey to this point had been arduous, but it had led her to a place of renewal. With a heart unencumbered by past grievances, Vanessa was ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that she had finally let go and found peace within herself.